appreciate you recording. Appreciate you guys joining us. Hopefully the treats will make this a bit more enjoyable as we go. So just a quick overview through what we're going to be covering off today. My name's Simon Walker, so I'm the Cloud Services Director here at Bytes. So I'm going to be doing a quick intro following the agenda overview, and then we're going to move straight into the gin tasting with John, and then over to Amazon, who's supporting us today, to talk a bit about Amazon and why it's a good place to back up your data. Then it's going to come back to myself, and I'm going to talk about the Amazon practice over here and how we position the DataShield service within the overall practice, just to see how we kind of came up with the idea. Then it's over to Veeam, who's supporting us today with Fergal and Christina, and then a Q&A, and then back to the drinks at the end and some chocolates with John. So initially, I guess, when we launched our Amazon practice around 4 years ago, we kind of focused around cost optimization and security and governance and billing services. Since then, we've very much evolved, and we work very closely with Amazon to look at what services we can leverage with our partners like Veeam and Amazon, bring them together and deliver kind of all-encompassing solutions. And this is how DataShield kind of came about, working with our partners and Amazon jointly to come up with a solution that's very simple, very easy. If you've not used cloud or Amazon specifically, it's a very nice and easy way to get in. Often there's a lot of support in terms of funding to get you into Amazon as well. So we were able to leverage that to take some of the pain away of trying these types of services. And we've seen some great success. So we launched DataShield almost 12 months ago now, and we've had around 30 odd clients that have signed up to it, and we've got a good pipeline. So we know it's popular. We know it's something that customers are really demanding in this time, particularly when assets are coming up for renewal and you're looking at infrastructure and costs, and some organizations still use tape and replacing disks. This is a nice option that you could potentially consider. And that's it for me. So without further ado, we've got obviously some gin to be tasted. So I'll hand over to John.
Thanks, Simon, and good afternoon, everybody. John Callally is my name, and Whiskey Island is my company, and I have the very important task of getting you poured onto your first drink this afternoon. We're going to start with gin, and then later on we're going to look at whiskey. So all you need for my segments of this afternoon are the little miniature of gin that came in your pack, that's Slingshot Irish Gin, the Poacher's Irish Tonic Water. That's what we're going to start with. And then later on, we've got the Green Spot Whiskey and the chocolates. Hopefully you still have the chocolates. I know on my card I said don't touch the bottles until the tasting, but I didn't say anything about the chocolates, so some of you might have you'll be forgiven if you tucked in. But anyway, what we're going to, all you need apart from what came to you in the box is glassware. So for the gin and tonic, how do you normally drink a gin and tonic? You probably use a slim gin, lots of ice, and a piece of lemon and a piece of lime. Now, you mightn't have that at the ready. If you do, great, and you have a minute or two to grab it, perfect. But otherwise, if you're not in a position to be able to get that together, I would actually, first of all, be suggesting that when you open this gin, that you sample it neat, because it is it's a small batch gin, very, very easy to drink and plenty of flavor. So, you know, the big world gins or the big Irish gin like Cork Dry Gin, Gordon's, like I'd never be recommending you or asking you to drink that neat because there's quite a lot of alcohol notes there. But when we're talking about small batch craft Irish gins, they're so good that they are essentially sipping gins. So please feel free to while we're tasting our gin and our tonic, to try the gin neat first. So you go ahead and get poured whatever way, either the gin and tonic or just a little bit of gin into your glass, and start going through the motions. Give it a smell first of all. Your sense of smell is a powerful thing, and then give it a taste. And meanwhile, I'll give you a little bit of story about gin, the highlights, the very short version of where Irish gin is today, because I know most of you are based on the island of Ireland, and you probably have realized that there is a little bit of a gin revolution underway here in Ireland. Where did that come from? Well, I'll tell you all about it. And by the way, if you've got plans later on, if you're driving, you don't feel obliged to drink all of these measures, both these measures in their entirety. Now, a lot of people will also ignore that bit of advice. But you drink what you deem fit. Like even if you take a little thimbleful from the gin and the whiskey, that's going to be enough for what we're doing here this evening. So hopefully you're enjoying that little bit of gin and tonic. I'm really going to be talking about 3 countries here this evening in terms of gin and whiskey. Later on, I'll be talking about Ireland and Scotland when it comes to whiskey. But really, I'll be talking a lot about England when it comes to gin. And the English didn't invent gin, but they definitely perfected it. And gin was invented by modern day, what was known as the Low Countries, for modern day Holland and Belgium. And they started, before records began, we don't even know when they started doing this, they started using juniper, which is a type of berry. It's a pine cone. A natural ingredient. They started making a sweetened wine using juniper. And the English, when they were traveling the world, and they were all of a sudden in the 80 Years' War down in the Low Countries, they were fighting with France and Spain over territory in the Low Countries. And the mercenaries from England who were down there in battle were drinking the local grog. They were drinking this gin invented by the Dutch and the Belgians to steady their nerves before entering battle. And if you know that expression, Dutch courage, that came, that could be traced all the way back to this 80 Years' War, when the English mercenaries were drinking Geneva to steady their nerves before entering battle in the Low Countries. Dutch courage. So by the time the war was over and they got back to England, they brought this newfound love for Geneva home, and London became the capital of gin production in the world. And it was terrible stuff that was being made initially. It was called Old Tom. And it was so bad, even the good Old Tom was so bad that they were adding sugar in on top of it to sort of kill out all the undesirable flavors. So it was an Irishman who actually revolutionized the production of gin in the mid-1800s, a man by the name of Aeneas Coffey. And he invented what's called a column still. Now, he was targeting whiskey distilleries with this newfound invention. It's essentially, you're making whiskey or alcohol, you're making alcohol 24 hours a day, and it gives you a real pure spirit, real high quality spirit. And what you do is you take that new neutral spirit, and with gin, you redistill it in copper pot stills with botanicals. And botanicals are what makes gin gin. And it's natural ingredients, again, like juniper. Juniper is the star of the show, but there's other, it's fruits, spices, herbs, bark, any natural ingredients that you can get from the ground or get from trees and so on. So once this arrived on the scene in London, it took off, and London dry gin was born. And the likes of Gilbey's and Gordon's and Beefeater, they all took off. So gin sort of had its moment, and like all drinks, trends in and out, and it was sort of really dormant at the turn of this century. But then you had the new brands like Bombay Sapphire arrive on the scene with all its glitzy blue packaging. and Hendrix gin, and the fishbowl glass arrived on the scene, and people were adding in cucumber instead of lemon and lime. So it really captured the imagination of drinkers, and gin started to grow legs again. And that is definitely reflected here in Ireland, mostly thanks to the producers. So more people now in Ireland are drinking gin than ever before. We've got 40 distilleries here in Ireland, now fully operational, making spirits in their own individual ways, and half of them, so 20 of them, are making Irish gin. And one in particular is Loch Ree Distillery, and they're right in the middle of Ireland. They're Lanesborough, County Longford. 3 siblings, 2 brothers and a sister. This is their flagship gin, Slingshot. And they're making gin the way I just described. They're taking their neutral spirit, which is whey, W-H-E-Y, that they get from a Cork-based dairy. And then they're redistilling with all their regular botanicals like juniper, citrus, orris root, mint, angelica. And then the really special botanical that they're using, and nobody else is doing this, they're taking peat, Irish peat from the bogs that surround Lanesborough. And they are one of the first distilleries in the world to use peat, Irish peat, as a botanical. So if you've tried this gin neat to begin with, you'll notice that it's nice and earthy. A little bit of sweetness there too. And I normally get good feedback on this gin, so I hope you like it too, and I hope you enjoy your gin and tonic. And by the way, that is the only Irish tonic water you can buy on the market, Poacher's Irish Gin. So nice opportunity to showcase that as well. An Irish gin and an Irish tonic. So you enjoy that drink, and then you'll be back to me later on where we'll try some whiskey.
Thanks, John. It's perfect. Hopefully everyone's enjoying that. We're open to Amazon and Ivan.
Thanks, John, and thanks, Simon. I'm gonna try and share my screen. And let me know if you can see it.
Yep,
Yeah.
good.
Okay, excellent. So I'm Ivan Skudin. I'm a partner solution architect with AWS, and I'm with storage segment in EMEA. And what storage segment does is focusing on the joint solutions that AWS has with the technology partners like Veeam, and also consulting partners and system integrators across EMEA. So I'm broadcasting today from the old city of Amsterdam in Holland, where I've just learned that gin actually came from. That's, yeah, really good to know. So without further ado, I'm gonna give you a quick overview of AWS Storage Portfolio and why Amazon S3 is a great choice to store backup data. But first, let's just take a satellite view over the AWS cloud infrastructure globally. So currently it consists of 25 regions, and with each region including at least 3 availability zones, 3 or more. So overall, that makes it 81 availability zones across the globe. And why it's important to have multiple availability zones in a single region, we'll cover a little bit later when we will talk about data durability. So from the global infrastructure to AWS storage portfolio. So we provide complete portfolio. So you, in the end, you need the right storage for any data. So we provide block storage, the service called Amazon Elastic Block Storage, the entire family of file services for Unix, Linux, Windows environments, and including the recently announced FSX for NetApp on tap. But today I'm going to focusing a little bit more on Amazon S3, our flagship object storage offering. So what customers are building from left to right, and they are externalizing their backup storage repositories using AWS Cloud. And this is the use case that we will be focusing more on today. Archive and compliance, talking about long-term content preservation, another secondary storage use case where S3 is a great fit. And obviously a number of primary storage use cases, including enterprise class home directories, data lakes, where data can be made accessible to a multitude of analytic tools in AWS cloud, and a variety of enterprise class business critical applications that customers are looking to just lift and shift from their on-premises environments over to AWS cloud. So to our partnerships. So this is where we've seen a lot of traction over the years. So Amazon S3, and it's great to see the ISVs like Veeam doing a great job of integrating their technology with Amazon S3. So if you're looking at what Veeam has done around innovation over the past 2-3 years, it's quite impressive. So the support for S3 hot storage classes was added in V10, and right now in V11, the storage backup repository can be extended or externalized quite easily by just adding capacity and archive tiers to it. But why customers are specifically choosing S3? So multiple reasons for that. It's a long history of innovation. The service was announced in 2006, and if we compare the price of S3 standard storage class, so it's 8% lower right now than it was back then. And AWS has done an enormous job of making sure that this service is easy to use and as cost effective as it can get. And accelerating innovation just to make it even more cost effective. We've been adding a number of S3 storage classes over the years. So what exactly is the how exactly those S3 storage classes look like as of today? So roughly, there's a number of storage classes where whenever you write data to them, they are spread and they are stored distributed. It is also called storage classes like S3 Glacier and S3 Glacier Deep Archive. Again, all of them are supported in the current version of Veeam backup and replication product. Then there's a couple of offerings like S3 One Zone Infrequent Access. So as the name suggests, this is when data stored not across 3 availability zones, but just in a single availability zone. So unless you have the ways to replicate data across AWS regions, that wouldn't be the best choice for your backup data. But again, if you replicate, then it's perfectly fine to use that. So just a little bit about durability and why it's important. So in our presentation, you can see 11/9 of durability, but there's a couple of aspects to it. Again, the first one is how we distribute the data across multiple availability zones. So that's just one aspect. And another one is the capability of Amazon S3 to detect inevitable storage failures and temporary loss of redundancy and restore that redundancy. So the data, especially if it's retained over the long term, remains consistent and uncorrupted even in the face of, again, as I said, the inevitable loss of hardware components, especially over the long period of time. So that's the durability, and that's how we achieved 11 nines comparing to 4 nines if you have just 2 copies in one location, or if you have 1 copy in each location, 5 nines, for example. So that's the comparison. So when we're talking about S3, it's important to understand not just the price of storage and compare the price of gigabytes per month or per year, but also understand what total cost of storage actually consists of. So with S3, it's storage, but also the cost of request, data transfer, if it's out of AWS cloud and back on premise, so-called egress cost, and also retrieval, especially if we're talking about cold storage classes. But if we compare that to traditional physical storage boxes running on-prem, then we should take into account multiple things like data center space, networking, human resources, the need to do hardware and software maintenance, and a need to procure more storage than actually consumed. It's important to have a headroom because nobody can ever tell how much capacity we're going to require even after a few months. And with using tape for long-term data storage and preservation, it's also important to take into account the cost of tape vaulting provider as well. So what are the typical backup challenges that we are observing when speaking with customers? So it's quite common to see traditional architecture. So when customers have their service and virtual machines protected on premises, and they use generic disk storage or maybe purpose-built backup appliance for local operational backups, and whenever they have a requirement to store backups long-term, they use tape technology. And there are few issues around that approach. Obviously, this is not cost-effective. It's not that easy to scale. As I already mentioned, storage can be over-provisioned, or from a different angle, the backup data repository can grow so quickly, the amount of data in it can grow so quickly, then it cannot catch up with the procurement process. And these are the challenges that us, in alliance with our storage ISV partners, are trying to address with the following approach. So the technology partners like Veeam have something called a native cloud connector built into their product. So essentially they can talk directly to Amazon S3 service endpoint, which we expose. So all that is required in that case is sufficient bandwidth. And even if this network bandwidth is not sufficient, Veeam can utilize something called AWS Snowball, a device that can be used for offline data transfers, which is extremely important for the initial data seeding if the bandwidth is not sufficient. So that's an example of a new technology that came along when with the onset of public cloud. And this is something that we are seeing more and more customers are adopting these days. And just very briefly about the benefits which customers can realize as a result. So again, it's important to have durable storage.
Welcome to my world.
Blocks of data across multiple availability zones.
Axon app is like Adobe.
Cassie, have you sorted that mute? Thanks.
Yep, done. Sorry about that, everyone.
No worries. Yeah. And as I mentioned, the S3 storage is cost efficient. And what I mean by that is it's OpEx only, no upfront cost, pay-as-you-go model. And this is what allows customer to eliminate tape backups completely and save a little bit on the operational backups on the local backup storage repository, which is typically a local disk. And last but not least, unlocking insights. So whenever you have your data, the backups of your data in the cloud, this data is in close proximity to a multitude of compute resources and multiple analytics services. So it's as easy as restoring your data and making that available to those resources. And a good example of this would be Veeam being able to convert the backups of virtual machines to Amazon EC2 instances. So that's my brief overview. And with that, let me hand over to Simon.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ivan. Apologies for that interruption there.
No problem.
I'm just going to share my screen now. Hopefully this all works. Can you see that okay?
Yep, good.
Awesome. So just a bit of positioning really of the practice itself. So we built the practice, as I mentioned, 4 years ago, and we've been developing it all along the way. And essentially we're in a position now where we have this full life cycle of services that we deliver to our customers, starting from organizations that are very early in their journey with regard to moving to the cloud, specifically AWS. And so we have this offering called Assess. And the assess phase really is to look at what you've got on premise, look at what that might look like in AWS, and produce a TCO report that gives you full insight, full detailed insight into the costs, the effort of migration, what funding is available. There's a lot of funding from Amazon to help you migrate, help you put resources into the cloud. So in a lot of the projects we've done recently on migrations, all the consultancy costs from our perspective has been covered. So the customer hasn't really had any costs from that to actually migrate into the cloud. And this whole purpose of the assess phase, which is a non-commit, fully funded activity that any customer can take with a minimum amount of servers, the minimum amount's around 50, then they can kind of start the journey and get that full visibility. Once they've gone through that stage, we move on to what we call discovery phase, where the customer's already agreed, okay, that looks okay from the assess phase. Let's look at it in more detail, look at some of the migration risk assessments, look at the actual plan that's necessary, talk to the application, the network team, the security team to make sure we've covered all that bases. This phase, again, for most migrations of any size, is fully funded by AWS. So you get a full in-depth report of what that migration is going to look like. Then we move into the mobilized phase, where we actually start going into the deep dive technical design of the landing zones, which is a concept within AWS that all the architecture will go in, essentially the governance, processes, procedures, networking, that all goes into the landing zones. But in that phase, we actually develop all that out, working with your teams, and we actually identify a workload that will become the pilot, so we can test all the governance and agreements that we've already done. And again, this phase can typically be fully funded by AWS. Once we pass that, we go into the migration, and yep, you guessed it, typically this phase is funded as well, of any size. So we're working on some quite large and medium-sized migrations that the customer on their side, they obviously have to put time and effort in. The teams have to work with us to help design and build out these architectures, but essentially they don't necessarily have to put their hand in the pocket to pay for a consultancy to do the work, because there's an advanced consultancy partner and authorized to deliver these types of services. Amazon will support you every step of the way. The next phase is around modernize. So a lot of organizations want to move away from maybe SQL or Windows, might want to look at containerization, microservices, breaking up applications, and building a more serverless type application architecture. So when we're talking migrations, we typically don't try and do that because there's a lot going on just to migrate. We look at optimizing and lift and shifting. But then once we're in the cloud, that's where we can start to modernize. And you might have workloads now in the cloud that you might have thought, oh, it'd be great if we could move away from the traditional architecture and move into a more modernized state of containerization, serverless computers. And by doing that, essentially, you can reduce your costs significantly in the cloud. So it's kind of all part of the journey. And again, that's funded. So if you have an application, an example, Windows SQL kind of backend application that you thought about modernizing, but haven't had the time to look at it in any detail, Amazon will fund $25,000 for us to essentially assess that application, put a design together to work out what that might look like in AWS, or if it's already in AWS, what it would look like in a different modernized state. So you can see every step of the way there's support. And then finally, we offer cost optimization, security and governance services. So often these, again, are funded by AWS for us to do. We're a solution provider for Amazon, so we're able to do billing on their behalf. We look after around $2.5 million of spend on Amazon, and we're constantly looking for areas where we can save customer money in that space. And for those organizations that need a little bit of help after they've migrated, we offer our 24/7 managed services, which is designed to flex up and flex down depending on what you require. So a lot of organizations that migrate into the cloud, they often need some support initially, but as their teams get more and more comfortable with the technology and the consoles, then we can see them take a step back, and then we can start reducing that support down as necessary, and maybe just supporting on more of the project work around modernization and such like. So where does DataShield fit in all this? So just give you a bit of an overview of what we do when it comes to this. You've already kind of heard a lot from Ivan around why Amazon for your data, for your storage, and we're seeing more and more organizations kind of looking at this. The way it works is essentially we do a quick survey. So there's a questionnaire that will come over, ask you some questions. Off the back of that, we may have some more questions depending on what your answers are, but often we can then move to your bespoke AWS design. So we'll produce a statement of work of what that architecture is going to look like. If there's funding available, we will look at funding, and that's based on the size, scale of requirements that we can apply to the overall project. And then that goes back to you, and assuming that you're happy with that, then you can obviously sign it off, goes to our PMO, our project management office, and their responsibility is aligning architects and resources so they can start working on the project. On the left-hand side, essentially what we do, the build work. So one of the first parts of it is making sure that you have that secure VPC. So essentially VPC is your network environment in AWS. We ensure that it's built to your requirements with the security that you need it to be. Then we essentially will build the AMI machine essentially for managing that backup for the infrastructure. And then we start talking about security, encryption, permissions, and object locking, depending on your requirements. So the whole solution is kind of bundled up. We also take care of setting up the accounts within Amazon. If you don't have a relationship with Amazon, we organize the billing of that service as well. So you don't have to worry about necessarily setting up new procurement procedures with Amazon directly. If you're already working with Bytes, you can just do that directly with us, which we do for hundreds of customers already. So some of the key benefits, this is a bit of a summary from Ivan's really. So the reasons what we see customers look at reasons for doing this is scale. So a big part of this is organizations that are constantly having to go out and get more disks, replace this, upgrade. This obviously replaces that pain because scale is essentially on demand. You can scale as much as you like. The durability is obviously key. I used to manage in my past data centers for many customers, and disks failing and architecture failing, ports going, all that kind of stuff kind of is removed when you move to the cloud. It's not your responsibility. It happens, but Amazon build everything for failure. So you do get that 11 nines of durability, as was mentioned previously. Security is key. Amazon have pretty much every certification on the planet for any area that you might require. They've got an actual site called their archive site, where you can actually pull policies off and give those to your auditors to show where your data is being held and why it's secure. And obviously the technology we use with Veeam can be encrypted in transit and at rest. So all that. The final point, which often is overlooked, is most customers' data that sits in their own data centers is largely not doing anything, mostly because there's not a lot of services around it that can do anything. Once your data is in a place where they've got some of the most powerful machine learning, AI technologies that are often pre-book run books that you can apply to data sets, depending on what your marketing teams or your internal data analysis teams require, we can potentially take data sets and run analytics against them and start pulling out information. And Amazon's have other products like QuickSight, which is a bit like a much cheaper version of Splunk or a data management tool. So you can start visualizing some of that data as well. So you can actually start using some of that historic data as opposed to just being sitting there and doing nothing. So we often see that as another key reason to move the data out of on-premise. That's me. So now I'm going to hand over to Veeam. Fergal first, I think.
Thank you very much, Simon. Good evening, everybody. So just a very brief introduction from me, really. So I know some of the people on the call. For those that I don't know, my name is Fergal Hennigan. I'm the territory manager for Veeam software in Ireland. I've been Veeam past 5 years. Happy to introduce my colleague, Christina, who's going to do the presentation to you today. But if there are any questions throughout the presentation, after the presentation, or at a later stage, I work very closely with the team in Bytes. Very happy to come have a conversation, Teams call, conversation, whatever it is these days, but delighted to do so. So yeah, just wanted to introduce myself and my colleague, Christina. So over to you, Christina.
Great, thanks so much, Fergal. So I hope everyone can see my screen.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. So as Fergal said, my name is Christina Dobre. I'm the EMEA Public Cloud Manager here at Veeam. And today I want to talk to you about how we can support customers in their cloud journey and, help accelerate cloud journeys together with Bytes and AWS. But let me start with a few words about the company. So if you're not familiar with Veeam, we're the global leader in backup, recovery, and data management solutions. As you can see here on the screen, 83% of the Fortune 500 trust us with their data. We continue to be a leader in Gartner's Magic Quadrant year after year. We did $1.1 billion in bookings in 2020. We have over 400,000 customers worldwide with 14 years of consecutive growth of customer numbers. And we are the #1 market share in EMEA in terms of backup vendors. So everything we're doing is simple, is flexible and reliable. We provide a single platform for cloud, virtual, physical, software as a service, and Kubernetes environments. So if you consider leveraging, Veeam and Bytes in conjunction with AWS, no matter where your workloads reside today or what your scenario is, whether you're running workloads only on premises and you want to leverage the cloud for storage, or you're running workloads in the cloud, or you have maybe more like a hybrid scenario, we're all here to make sure you're successful in your journey. And let's talk a bit about this hybridity I just mentioned. When we look at how most customer environments look like today, it is clear that we're living in a hybrid world, right? Most businesses have a combination of on-prem workloads and public cloud workloads, and this is the business reality for most of our customers today. When we surveyed our customers and had a look at kind of where they're at and plan to be in the next year, we've seen a massive growth in this space. So here on the screen, you can see how production workloads are evolving. And if we look at our 2023 estimated, it shows that more than half of the workloads are likely to be hosted in a cloud environment. So the shift to cloud is here and now. It's happening and it's definitely accelerating. And I think most of you in the call today are probably at some point in your cloud journey as well, right? Whether you're just starting to migrate now or you're running production workloads already. And we have a set of great capabilities that will help you on this journey, regardless of the stage you're at. So let's have a look at this capability. So here on the screen is everything that Veeam is doing in the public cloud space. And as you can see, there's a variety of scenarios. And first on the list is the cloud native backup piece. So if you're running workloads in AWS already, this is something you may want to look at, as we are leveraging the AWS technology to deliver cloud native, fully automated AWS backup and disaster recovery to help you protect and manage your workloads, the ones that are sitting in AWS, such as EC2, RDS, etc. Then there's the cloud mobility piece, right? Where we offer the key capabilities to move workloads from and to any platform in any location. And this is a huge step forward in simplifying the complexities that a hybrid environment can bring. Next, we have Kubernetes Backup. So if you're running EKS, we also provide a purpose-built solution for backup and restore, disaster recovery, and mobility of Kubernetes applications. And this also fits under this holistic data protection strategy. Then there's Microsoft 365 Backup, and we offer a range of deployment and storage options here as well. You can leverage AWS S3 to store your Microsoft 365 backup data. And this is important because one of the best practices when we're talking about data protection in general is the 3-to-1 rule, right? You need to have 3 copies of your data stored on 2 different media, one offsite. So if your company is using Microsoft 365, we can help you achieve the 3-to-1 rule by leveraging the object storage support, giving you the possibility to back up Microsoft 365 data to AWS as well. Then we have backup to the cloud, right? So if you're running production workloads on premises, you're backing up that environment with Veeam, we're enabling you, as Ivan said earlier, to automatically tier your backups to S3, right? To help you reduce the costs associated with with more expensive on-premises backup storage. So if you're now just starting to think about the public cloud, this is definitely a good way to get you started, and DataShield can definitely help you with all that. And in addition to the ability of backing up to the cloud, you also have the ability to do disaster recovery to AWS with Veeam, right? And then as more and more companies are looking to switch from a CapEx model to more of an OpEx model, as we've seen, there's also a shift from offline physical tape to cold storage for long-term archival of data. And this is important not only for disaster recovery readiness, but also for compliance reasons, right? Some companies need to keep data for a number of years, and we definitely enable you to embrace these options as well. And then last on the list here, ransomware protection. So protecting and keeping your valuable data safe from malicious attacks. And this is also important, as the evolution of ransomware has been one of the most destructive trends of the last decade. And the sophistication and adaptability of ransomware and all other cyber threats today require an agile layer defense, right? And you cannot prevent a cyber attack, but what you can do is take the necessary steps to be prepared to effectively protect your most valuable asset, which is your data. And backups written to resilient storage will be one of the most important steps for ensuring this ransomware resilience. And to help you achieve that, Veeam is providing immutability with the AWS S3 object lock capability. So as you can see, Veeam can help you achieve that, that resiliency as well. All right. So we have this great capabilities. So let's have a quick look at how they fit into the main Veeam and AWS use cases. So we have the extend to AWS piece, where, as we've seen, we can back up on-prem, virtual, and physical workloads to AWS S3 or Glacier. You can make these backups immutable, leveraging the native S3 object lock capability. And then there's also the option of backing up other cloud-based workloads to AWS, such as Microsoft 365 data, right? then there's the migrate to AWS piece, where you can directly restore, as Ivan was saying, any Veeam backup to AWS, right? In just a few clicks, super easy. And you can permanently migrate those workloads there, or just migrate them for test and dev purposes. That's your choice. And there's really a variety of scenarios here, but we are offering this migration capability as well. And then finally, we've got the AWS backup piece. We discussed about this previously. So backing up workloads that you're running in AWS today. Then the Kubernetes native backup and recovery for containerized workloads and Amazon EKS. And last but not least, the VMware Cloud on AWS piece, right? So backup and recovery for VMware Cloud on AWS. And finally, I want to talk to you about something exciting. We have a great promo running right now for the cloud native data protection piece. So backup and disaster recovery for workloads running in AWS. We give you free unlimited licenses for 30 days, $250 cloud credits to help offset the AWS infrastructure costs while you're evaluating. And if you decide to buy, we're giving 3 months for free, so 25% off. Of course, if you're interested in this promo, access the vanity URL here on the screen to check out the details. All right, and this brings us to the end of my presentation. Thanks so much for your attention. If you have any questions, you can add them here in the chat, or you can contact us via email. I've added all our contact details on the presentation slides, which will be, of course, shared with you. So feel free to reach out to any of us. There's an entire team of professionals that can assist you in your cloud journey, no matter the stage. So we look forward to hearing from you. And with that, I'll let you get back to tasting. Thanks.
Thanks, Christina. So I guess next stage is just see if there's any questions. I'm not sure, Cassie, if we've seen anything come through on the chat. If we have, we can obviously attack those. But if anybody has any shout out questions for any of the presenters or anybody else, then please shout out.
Well, Simon, actually, I've got some come through from Cassie that I can pose to the presenters, and then we can take it from there. So first question, I guess for Christina, really, but Simon, you can jump in. Why do I need to back up my AWS workloads?
Yes, I would take that one. So that's a very good question, and it's a very common question, really. So what's happening is, as you transition certain workloads, maybe apps and data to the cloud, AWS is indeed responsible for protecting the infrastructure that runs all of those services that you're using there, right? But the data is still your responsibility, and it's still your responsibility to protect it. And AWS also has a shared responsibility model where it's clearly stated kind of what AWS is responsible for and what the customer is responsible for. So yeah, you can definitely have a look at that as well. Hope this answers the question.
Yeah, I don't think I'd add much to that, but we often see that come up, and often when we take on managed services, we realize the customers don't necessarily have robust backups in place on their architecture. They might be just doing snapshots, but don't really have a recovery process. So we'll work with customers to develop that.
Brilliant, thank you. Question 2, I think, has already been answered. The question was, is it possible to get a trial of Veeam? I think you covered that in your last slide, but for whoever asked that question and for any others that are thinking the same, then get in touch post this session, and we'll work through with you how we can get you access into the technology and what we can look at doing to help potentially even drive proof of concept engagements. And indeed, that kind of leads me on to, we've got a number of my colleagues at Bytes that will be doing follow-ups with you, getting in contact, looking to see if you want to progress a conversation. So they will be getting in contact with you from tomorrow. So don't feel you have to reach out to us, but please do fill in the feedback forms that are going to be presented to you. I think the final question, I'm not sure the context. It says, does the backup for AWS require agents? But that's all we've got on the question. So unless the person that asked that question wants to take themselves off mute and pose it to the wider group, I think we're going to struggle on that one at the moment.
I think Christina could probably talk about how Veeam works, how it's deployed on premise. That might help.
Yeah, I can jump in on that one. I mean, traditionally, as you mentioned there, Simon, we can use agents for things like physical boxes if you're on premise, example. But using Veeam Backup for AWS, it is natively using the snapshots of both EC2 and RDS. So we don't need an agent installed in any guest machines. We use that native capability, but that then also allows us to take that snapshot, but then move off into like S3 buckets as well. So you can have that image level copy as well.
Perfect.
Brilliant. Thank you. Unless anyone else has got braver with a gin as it's going down and wants to step in and ask any questions, I'll leave it there for a couple of secs before I hand back over to John for the whiskey and chocolate. But if there is anyone that has any questions, ask now or forever hold your peace. No, everyone wants to get into the whiskey and chocolate, clearly. Right, John, over to you then.
Great, Adam. Thank you very much. So welcome back, folks. Hope you really enjoyed that gin, the Slingshot Gin and Tonic. And now we're going to try, which is genuinely one of my favorite whiskies. It's been around a long time. And it's Green Spot. Most of you based here in Ireland will probably be familiar with this brand, but it is quite a special Irish whiskey. And you can go ahead and in your own time pour yourself a little sample from the bottle. It doesn't have to be the whole bottle, but go ahead if you feel like drinking the whole thing. It's 50 milliliters of whiskey. Any glass will do, really. We're not taking this too seriously. That's a whiskey glass, and that's perfect because it's got a nice wide base and there's plenty of room to swirl the whiskey around, and it can all come to life fully. But if you have a rocks glass, a small drinking glass, that's absolutely fine. A wine glass or a brandy glass, even better. But yeah, as long as you can see what's in the glass and it's big enough for you to be able to get your nose in to smell, you've got a good glass. So there are 4 styles of whiskey in Ireland. There's grain whiskies, malt whiskies, single pot still whiskies, and blends. And a blend is a combination of any 2 or 3 of those aforementioned styles. And most Irish whiskies are blends. Jameson, Bushmills, Paddy, Powers, all the big ones, they're all blended whiskies, and that doesn't make it a bad thing or anything like that. It's just that that's probably the springboard for a lot of whiskey distilleries into, especially here in Ireland, into specializing in single malts and single pot still whiskies. So this is a really special style of whiskey here in Ireland because it's unique to Ireland. So there's no other destination, whiskey destination in the world making single pot still whiskey. It's just the Irish. And this is one of our best sellers as well. So when you have the whiskey, the color tells you an awful lot about whiskey, by the way. In particular, it tells you what type of wood it's been aged in. And if you get something that's sort of pale brown, a very light color, that will tell you that that whiskey has spent time aging in ex-American casks, ex-bourbon barrels. And that's what most Irish whiskey is aged in, is ex-bourbon casks. But this whiskey is quite special in that it's aged in ex-bourbon casks, and then it's also aged in ex-sherry casks also that are brought in from Spain. And I find that when I taste this whiskey, it gives it a lovely fruity taste with a little bit of caramel coming through as well. And it's for that reason actually that I specifically chose this box of Butler's Irish chocolates, because there's a caramel filling inside each of these pieces of chocolates if you haven't already tried them. So when it comes to pairing whiskey and chocolate, it's quite subjective, really. I find these two go really well together, I think, because the 2 strands of caramel from the whiskey and from the chocolate blend in really nice with each other, and they complement each other really, really well. Now, but that's where the subjectiveness comes into it, because some of you who are drinking the green spot, you mightn't necessarily notice the caramel. When I notice caramel, it doesn't really make me right. And, you know, that's why I never really give tasting notes at my tastings, because really those tasting notes tell you more about me than they tell you about the whiskey. But the main thing is, I hope that you're enjoying that whiskey, because I think it is genuinely still one of the best whiskies that you can buy here in the market. So when it comes to the story of whiskey, again, I'm going to give you the bite-sized version. And I know there's a gentleman here from Scotland who I've met before, so I always have to be very careful when I make the following statement that, did you know the Irish invented whiskey? And really, I don't have anything to back that up with. The Irish say that they invented whiskey. The Scots will tell you that they invented whiskey. But the truth is, we don't really know who invented it, because we're going so far back in time. But what we do know is during the 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, Irish whiskey was the world leader, and it dominated the world whiskey scene. And we had about 88 distilleries here on the island of Ireland, all making whiskey in their own individual ways, and they were doing about 12 million cases worldwide, annual sales of Irish whiskey. And we hit the 1900s and it all fell apart, unfortunately. What happened was, everything happened consecutively, really. The First World War broke out in World War I. There was no, barley and coal were to be used for the war efforts only. So from a distillery's point of view, there goes your main source of fuel and your main ingredient. We had war here in Ireland, 1916 and 1919. 1920, prohibition in the US. There goes our biggest exports market overnight. And then the final nail in the coffin was, to go back to our friend, the Irishman Aeneas Coffey. He invented this column still. It revolutionized the gin industry in London, but it also is responsible for the Scottish blend. And this was adopted by the Scotch whiskey makers, ignored by the Irish whiskey makers, and that put the Scotch whiskey on the map. That put Scotch whiskey on the map, and sales went through the roof, and that left Irish whiskey in the doldrums. So by the 1960s, there were only 5 brands or distilleries left here in Ireland: Jameson and Powers in Dublin, Paddy Irish Whiskey down in Cork, Bushmills in the north, and we had Tullamore Dew in the Midlands. So those 5 distilleries, they knew that if they kept competing against each other, they weren't going to survive. So they formed Irish Distillers Group. They joined forces. An Irish Distillers Group became the only whiskey company in Ireland. And that, first of all, saved the category from extinction altogether. And that's really when the rebirth of Irish whiskey began, back in '66. So those 5 distilleries, with the exception of Bushmills, they closed their individual distilleries and they moved all production down to Middleton in County Cork. 1975, that's when that happened, when they opened their distillery. 1987, John Teeling opened Cooley Distillery in County Louth. So there was Irish distillers and there was Cooley, and that would be the way it would be until 2010, just 2 whiskey companies. In 1988, a large French drinks company arrived on the scene and they want to buy an Irish whiskey. Well, they end up buying 5 of them. They buy Irish distillers. And they know that they're not going to be able to sell all 5 brands equally, so they single out Jameson. They want to get Jameson into every bar, every restaurant, every off-license all over the world, and that's exactly what they did. They did a brilliant job with Jameson. And Jameson became the fastest growing whiskey in the world. Irish whiskey became the fastest growing premium spirit in the world. And that's, as a direct result of that, that's why we have these distilleries opening up all over Ireland right now. So I mentioned 40 distilleries earlier on. It's an incredible number when you think that only 10 years ago, there was just Irish distillers and Cooley. There's about 25 more distilleries that are due. They're either work in progress or their planning is true. So there will be over 65 distilleries here in Ireland making whiskey again in their own individual ways. So I hope you're enjoying Green Spot. This is I suppose, setting the benchmark in Irish whiskey in terms of premium whiskey, our premium whiskey offering, because the world has fallen in love with Jameson, but that would be seen as quite, I suppose, an entry-level whiskey. And now there's a demand for a premium Irish whiskey, and whiskies like Redbreast 12-year-old and the Spot family are starting to do really well, especially in the US. Obviously, the new distilleries, they've quite a way to go before they can match with the type of sales that Green Spot and Redbreast and premium Jameson whiskies are doing, but they'll get there eventually. So when I say this is a single pot still whiskey, you're probably familiar with single malt. Single malt is one of the most famous styles of whiskey, and that's where we use 100% malted barley in the production of that whiskey. So the barley, I've got some barley here that Jameson sent me a while back. That's taken straight from the fields. And normally the distilleries, when they get this barley, they saturate it in water and they put it in a hot room. And they send hot air into that room, and that dries the barley out. And it germinates. So you trick the barley into thinking that it's spring. So it germinates, and now we have malt. So in Scotland, they light a peat fire, and a lot of the smoke from that fire comes in contact with the barley, and that's why you get the smoky taste if you're drinking a peated Scotch whiskey. But here in Ireland, our whiskies tend to be non-peated, and that's one of our real unique selling points when we're putting Irish whiskey out there and trying to put it in front of consumers as an alternative to Scotch or bourbon or Indian or Thai or any world whiskey. Like, I'm going to a promotion in Frankfurt tomorrow morning. I'm going to be selling some Irish whiskies, pouring Irish whiskey all weekend, some new real great whiskies that are doing really well here in Ireland from some of the new distilleries as well, and I'll be pouring that to German consumers all weekend, and with a view to selling whiskey trails, of course, but flying the flag for Irish whiskey. So anyway, with Mitchell and Sons, the story goes back to the late 1800s, and they had their main shop on Grafton Street in Dublin, Main Street, Dublin. And they were importing lots and lots of sherry from Spain. And the sherry was arriving over in large casks. So they'd empty out those casks, they bottle it, and they were ready to go. But these empty barrels that were left behind, they were just taking up space in the cellars. So they decided one day, right, let's send over these empty barrels to Jameson's, which was about a 20-minute horse and cart ride away. Send them over, we'll fill up these barrels that are soaked in sherry with new make spirit straight off the stills from Jameson's. So it was experimental, and they brought the casks back and they said, let's keep our eye on them and see how we're doing. And they decided that they needed to keep some order on their inventory in terms of the aging potential of each cask. So they went out and bought 4 tins of paint: green, red, yellow, and blue. And each cask would get a dab of paint, and that paint would indicate the aging potential of that cask. So if it was 7 to 10 years aging potential, it would get a green dab of paint. Hence the reason why it's called Green Spot whiskey. The green dab of paint. And if you're familiar with the family brands of Yellow Spot, Red Spot, Blue Spot, they're all follow suit there. So with Green Spot, the special ingredient is instead of using 100% malted barley as they do with single malt whiskey, we use 50% raw barley straight from the fields and 50% malt, and we grind them together, forming a powder. The other special thing about this single pot still whiskey is that it's made in batches, and it's distilled in batches in these large copper pot stills. So if you go into any Irish distillery, you'll most of the time see 3 of these distilleries on the distillery floor. And that's what makes Irish whiskey really special, I think, especially when we're selling it overseas. It's that it's triple distilled, 3 times distilled. And that's the case for Green Spot here. The more you distill, the smoother and lighter a whiskey you're going to get. And even the head distiller down in Middleton, I heard a podcast there recently, he says that extra distillation here in Ireland changes everything. That's where you're getting the lovely, smooth, all day type of style whiskey, but don't drink it all day. Otherwise, with this Irish whiskey, it is a quintessential Irish whiskey. It's triple distilled, made from barley, malted and unmalted barley, and it's aged for 7 to 10 years in ex-bourbon and ex-sherry casks. And that is the story of Greenspot. So I know that's an awful lot of information there. Does anybody have any questions? We're all enjoying. Well, let me just, one or two common questions that come in anyway is people often ask, how should I drink whiskey? I shouldn't really be adding water, should I? Or ice? And my answer would be absolutely do that. If that's the way you like drinking whiskey, you should always add water. When I sample, one of the real perks of my job is I sample a lot of new Irish whiskies, so I'm able to talk about them at tastings. And I will always I'll sample them neat, first of all, and then I'll add two little teardrops of water, just 2 little drops, because it's amazing what that can do for the whiskey. It'll open it up completely. Any of the trapped esters in the alcohol, it'll bring them to life. And with some whiskeys, you might go back for your second and third sip and get a completely different profile altogether. If you like adding ice, you should add ice. I saw recently there on Twitter, Jamie Heaslip, our ex-rugby star, he takes part in this Friday night sip on Twitter. So you pour yourself a glass of whiskey and on Twitter you tweet about what you're drinking. And he had Redbreast 12 in a glass filled with ice, and all the purists were writing, oh, take the ice out, don't add ice, what are you thinking? Leave him alone. Like if you like drinking whiskey with ice, you go ahead and add ice into your whiskey. Like that's what's beautiful about whiskey now. There are no rules. And if you like using whiskey as a cocktail, absolutely. Maybe not with Greenspot, it's because it's probably a bit too complex. But if you have a Jameson or a Tullamore at home, one of the nicest cocktails that I make here at home, and I had it recently at a barbecue before winter kicked in, is I filled a bell jar, I poured in a full bottle of Jameson, a full carton of apple juice, a full carton, liter carton of cranberry juice, mixed it all around, and then poured it out into glasses over ice and a slice of lime, and people were drinking that for the afternoon. Beautiful, easy to make cocktail at home. So listen, I don't know how long I've been on, but I'm sure I'm up to 10 minutes. I'll leave it there, folks. And if there's any questions, please don't hesitate to ask.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that. That was very, very interesting. I'm not sure how long I would last with the cocktail that you talk about, though. I think that might be a slippery slope into a coma. But no, thank you. Appreciate it. I hope everyone's enjoyed it. That's been fantastic. So look, we are at the end of the session. Thank you, everybody, for attending. If I can just get Georgia, are you online just to talk through? There we go. We have got, you should have it pop up on your screen, a little feedback form. If I could get people to click through and submit your responses, that'd be fantastic. But as I said earlier, what we will be doing is my colleagues within Bytes will be following up post the event to get your feedback and most importantly, see how we might go about taking you down this road and hopefully moving your backups into AWS. But unless there are any burning questions, we will finish there. And thank you, and hope you all have a pleasant rest of your evening and you're well lubricated for a good night's sleep. Brilliant. All right. Well, look, thank you, everybody. And